Welcome, everybody. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. And this will be our last webinar this year. And so this year we've hosted webinars focusing across different domains, sports, military, health, all with this goal of providing you information and tools to move better. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by Stacey Carone, Murphy Grant, and Tori Lindley. All serve as leaders within National Athletic Trainers Association and within the medical community as a whole. And all three have just an incredible amount of knowledge. So really excited to dive into some of the experiences and perspectives they have and sharing them with you all. And before I ask them to introduce themselves, brief disclaimer that this webinar is not intended to provide, this webinar is intended to provide insightful information to the public, and the views and opinions expressed do not necessarily state or reflect those of the organization or the institutions that the panelists represent. And if there's time here at the end, we'll do a quick Q&A to finish it out. And so feel free to submit questions using the Q&A feature. And with that, we'll start with introductions. So Stacey, if you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself and tell us how you got to where you are now.
Great, thanks, Phil. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Stacey Carone. I'm the Associate Athletic Director for Sports Medicine and Sports Performance at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, also known as UMBC. I am in my third year here. It's been a fantastic journey thus far. Really happy to be at a place where I'm where my feet belong. I spent a lot of time in the autonomy schools and the Power Five. I loved every moment of it. Really excited to progress my career here and what some would refer to the mid-majors. We don't love that term. We're providing elite level medicine and care and athletics. Before my time here, I was at Rutgers University, Villanova University. I've had the opportunity to act both as an athletic trainer and as a strength and conditioning professional, as I am dual certified, which is one of my greatest benefits, is to be able to interact with both sides of the dynamic. And that's why being here at UMBC was a perfect fit, because I have the opportunity to oversee both departments and now kind of lead what we call a high performance sports medicine, sports performance department.
Excellent. Yeah, I've never been a fan of the mid-major term either. Yeah.
No, not at all.
Great. Murphy Grant, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Phil. My name is Murphy Grant. I'm the Senior Associate Athletic Director, Sports Performance and Healthcare Administrator at Wake Forest University. I've been here for about 15 months now, really enjoying the role as an administrator. Prior to Wake Forest, spent 13 years as the Director of Sports Medicine at the University of Kansas, and also the head football athletic trainer. And then just like Stacey, even prior to that, at Oklahoma State as an athletic trainer and strength conditioning coach for men's basketball down there. So definitely enjoying this opportunity, and also the chair of the Intercollegiate Council for Sports Medicine. So can't forget that piece as well, but excited for the opportunity. Thanks, Phil.
Great. Tori Lindley. Tori, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as well.
You bet. Thanks, Phil, and thanks to the audience for choosing this educational opportunity. It's a pleasure and an honor to be alongside of Stacey and Murphy, and looking forward to the rest of this hour. I have 18 years of experience at the Division I level at Northwestern University as the Director of Athletic Training Services, both serving as a clinician as well as an educator, but primarily day-to-day as a healthcare administrator. In addition to experience at a place like Northwestern, I'll call it Group of Five, Stacey, for lack of a better term, at 2 years at Eastern Michigan University. Really enjoyed that opportunity. 3 years at Michigan State University and 3 other years in Division III as a head athletic trainer at Hamline University. So really appreciate the dynamic across multiple levels, and would underscore, Stacey's comment about, this group certainly, as well as multiple athletic trainers, sports performance coaches, et cetera, regardless of role, it's typically the aim and the goal that, dependent of budgets, ultimately providing the best care that we can provide, both health, safety, as well as performance enhancement for our student athletes. And that's, really what today is about as well. And appreciate this platform, Phil, that you provided for us to discuss, what's really an incredibly important emerging topic.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think all three of you touched on it. Your skill sets are pretty broad, in experiencing not only from a leadership standpoint, but also athletic training and even in some of the performance areas as well. Particularly important in the times we're at right now. World's changing rapidly. Even before we went live here, we discussed the term pivot. Everybody's pivoting in some way right now, and having to deal with a very changing world that we live in, whether we like it or not. And I think monitoring when it comes to musculoskeletal system is a big part of that. And one of the things we've noticed with the pandemic we're in is when we look at the system, we've got to go beyond traditional screens, which a lot of times involve more dynamic things. And how do we best optimize and balance dynamic and performance testing, and these sensational performance insights with what's becoming sensational injuries as well. An example I'll use briefly that we've seen with student athletes is saw one student athlete experience pain in the upper back, unrelated to any sort of event. And checking that individual's phone, we saw that pre-COVID, they were walking 6,000 steps a day. Now in COVID, it's about 500 steps a day, right? And so that types of shifts is happening. They're not walking to class. They're not walking to restaurants with friends, right? These normal daily activities are gone, or at least limited. And the athlete's still training hard at practice, but then the rest of the day is sitting down or lying on a couch. So want to kick off here with you, Stacey, and kind of discuss this a little bit more with this drop in ADLs, activities of daily living. What are some of the things that you guys are doing right now to monitor movement or monitor the athlete during this time?
Sure. I think for us, we started before we returned. We talk about monitoring now in a very different way. Unfortunately, I think any college campus right now is talking about symptom tracking and symptom monitoring. At UMBC, we didn't want to lose complete touch of where our student athletes were when they went home during March 12th, the day that college athletics ended. So we actually continued on our entire monitoring system beginning on March 12th. So we did everything from monitoring what their activity was, what their mental wellness was, because we recognized that was a huge key, and just started monitoring them throughout the duration. All we did is, again, we pivoted. We took what we would usually do for our daily monitoring. We have a fantastic platform that we utilize for all of our teams, and we just tweaked it a bit to make it a little bit more COVID specific. It gave us an opportunity to track where they were going when it came to travel recommendations and things like that, track their mental health, tracked what they were actually doing, and just tried to treat it as close to what normal life looks like. So that's how we started. When we returned on campus and we all came back in a staggered fashion, we did somewhat of what we usually do. Sparta is part of our PPE, not personal protective equipment, but of our pre-participation exam. And we just continued to do that. We increased our monitoring and our scanning a little bit more frequently, especially for our high-risk teams that we knew were going to get out there and be super active, some after a little bit of a layoff. So some of our teams, we scan a little bit more frequently, but that's just how we did it. We just slightly tweaked what we already have been doing and just started increasing the frequency of it and diving very, very deep into the data, and then changing our messaging with coaches a little bit in the beginning. It was, hey, we've been off the grid now for quite some time. Many of us couldn't have access to a gym. Many of us couldn't have access to go for a safe run outside. So helping our coaches understand that some of our Sparta scans, some of our other things that we were picking up on, we're just going to have to take our training and take our practice plans and modify based upon that objective data that we're getting from those student athletes.
Yeah, and I think it makes total sense when you talk about the times that we're in and pivoting. Increased frequency of information is important, right? Because things can change, I think, a lot more rapidly than they have in the past, whether that's a different preparation or just, different day to day. So I guess same question to you, Murphy, like, during this time, what are some of the things you guys are doing to monitor student athletes during this pandemic or changing times?
Right. Pretty similar to what, Stacey had mentioned on when the student athletes left and how we wanted to monitor them while they were home. Again, using different platforms, knowing that we really couldn't coach, but, deliver the workouts and the things that they needed to keep themselves active. That's a good term, but then medically making sure they were provided, excuse me, with the healthcare that we felt was important enough to get them ready. Because again, you didn't know when the return was going to be, I mean, it was that guessing game. But again, with it being roughly 4 months of reduced activity, and you mentioned, the 6,000 steps down to 500 steps, once they returned, you really truly didn't know where their level of activity was, so we paid attention to their loads every day, outside of the scans, what were their loads through the catapult, what were their whoop bands saying, we were looking at all these things and collecting the data to prepare for competition. And, again, that's something that you can't control, the intensity of competition, but how could we keep them safe? How could we keep them healthy, trying to prepare for competition again, and dealing with maybe some contact tracing and some positive COVID. I mean, there's a lot of variables that we're still, dealing with right now to try to protect them and watch their loads and monitor them daily. So pretty similar to what Stacey did, but with some of the other daily things that we were using.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? Is some of the assumptions that we may have all used in the past with students returning to campus. We just can't make those same assumptions anymore, right? There's no context, right? So yeah, continuing to look at new things and I think be open to trends is key.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Tori, at least from looking at the profession as a whole, what are some of the things that you're seeing or suggestions that NATA is looking to really encourage in terms of, okay, how can we better monitor best practices during times like this?
Yeah, best practices, Phil, is a really good term, and that's really the direction that I can add to this, or the direction to go that I can add. Stacey and Murphy gave really outstanding answers and covered a lot of ground. Two areas that I would emphasize. Number one, we wanted to provide as much resourcing and as much messaging as we could, not only to athletic trainers, but to, the high performance teams in total, to emphasize the need to keep a focus on acclimatization. The return and the safe return was such a huge undertaking, and all those involved in sports medicine, took on roles that nobody ever anticipated and added further duties to their already, full day, full week, full month. But to remember that once, we achieved some level of activity, and whether it be June, July, or August or beyond for different conferences at different levels, can't forget the impact of reacclimatization, not only to activity, but of course to the environmental conditions, which, at different times of the year are going to have posed different challenges across the country. So that was number one, as a part of the resourcing to really, bring home that message. And then it is more of a term, or I guess a concept, not necessarily connected to COVID or the pandemic, but as different measuring systems were added, different ways in which we were monitoring student athletes, and Stacey hit on them related to the pandemic, there became a decent amount of concern anecdotally, and we also had some pretty, robust discussions as a profession globally about how do we help support student athletes who are now feeling like we're too intrusive, we're asking too much of them, we're asking too many questions, there's too many apps and too many surveys, and to the point where you lose them not only in the truth of their reporting, but we've all experienced it, and maybe it's a part of our discussion later on today, Phil, but there's a big sister, big brother component that is really difficult for us to challenge as clinicians and providers and practitioners, to know that we still have a strong developed relationship. And then of course there's the huge, last thing I'll say is the huge Pandora's box of information that's being collected. What type of information is it? Is it PHI? Is it not PHI? So that connects to that big sister, big brother, and making sure that you don't get the flip the switch off level of fatigue from our athletes because we're just doing too much.
Yeah, the engagement, has to be a key piece. And the more you ask, right, the more you challenge that engagement from the student athlete or any individual. And I think that one of the early things you brought up too, which we can dive into with Stacey and Murph and coming up, is there's kind of two buckets, right? There's the return to campus, right? But then there's also this acclimatization period, right? Of like, okay, I'm getting used to being back and into practice. And that's that second piece. We almost call it a double hump, right? There's the first hump is returning. And then once you're back, how do you keep the pulse on things as they start to adapt? Yeah. So I'm curious, dive in a little bit more into the details. Stacey, there's that first hump of arriving, right? Pre-participation, and that's something that Murphy hit on as well. And then there's the weekly monitoring. Curious on, what are some of the specifics you do, Sparta or otherwise, whether it's pre-participation and then monitoring on a weekly basis. What are some keys, more on a specifics of like, hey, this is what we gotta have, or these are some informations, because to Tori's point, we can't do everything, right? And so what are kind of the have to haves, the nice to haves, that you guys employ?
Sure. It's a great question. And I think one of the great things that I enjoy being at this level is I've had the ability to merge some of the budget items that maybe we didn't think we would be able to afford, but we've been able to prove its worth by maybe decreasing our cost on insurance premiums and things like that. So a lot of what we do is based on a team approach. So we have some teams that have it in their budget to heart rate monitor. Love that data, take that data all day long. Have a couple of teams that have the ability to use Catapult. Love that data, take that data. I think for us, the one piece that we have across the board that anybody at any institution can do is a monitoring platform where you can monitor acute to chronic workloads. It's free. It takes a little bit of math on an Excel spreadsheet, but I think for us, that at least gives us the lay of the land. That at least gives us how they're feeling. Yes, it would be, as you say, subjective in terms of how they're feeling, what their exertion was for that day. But for a school such as UMBC, where I can't afford every bell and whistle, I can prioritize the ones that I know give me that data that work, like Sparta, hence the reason I'm so grateful to be partnered with you all. But there are other boots on the ground things that we can do. And that piece for us actually speaks really well to the coaches because we have it color coded. We have a dashboard that they see. When they open up their Excel spreadsheet, they have a dashboard that has each individual student athlete on their team. It has where their acute to chronic workload is. It has a little box for their injury. It's color coded green if they're full go, red if they're not. It has the complaints that they had musculoskeletal for that day. And big props to our sports performance department for running that, because I've been the idea behind it, and they are 100% the boots on the ground and made it a beautiful tool. And for us, the kids fill it out every single day. They're bought into it because they have seen that when we do monitor and when we do arrange our training and our practice sessions to reflect how they're actually feeling, there's a great level of success that happens behind that. Player availability equals team success. I was able to keep them that much healthier. Coach was able to have that many more players available. And all of a sudden we started seeing some success across the board in the America East, which was very exciting. So just really taking all the data that you can find, taking time to understand empirically what's important, and then just investing into that. It doesn't have to be, I would love to have whoop bands, I would love to have all that, but I don't here. And especially in a time of this crisis that a lot of college institutions are facing, we don't have the money to expand further. So really just fine tuning our reporting process, fine tuning the data that we do have through Sparta, and really just staying with it and proving that it works, even in a time when we had to go through the acclimatization process, even the time when we had to modify our training for 6 weeks to make sure, number one, that we were staying healthy, but number two, we were staying COVID free as possible. So just really diving into what you do have and what is available to your institution.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned in there musculoskeletal complaints. Yeah, especially important in this population because there's a pretty razor thin margin between a complaint and an injury, right? Depending on the individual's, subjective pain tolerance, or, to one individual, I'm in pain, that same issue might be an injury to a different individual, right? So there's important to be looking at not just injuries, but also, to your point, the complaints, because sometimes inevitably that actually leads to something more severe. That's
right. And getting on top of that before it does become an issue, that for us has just been key. Again, we control what we can control here. In this world, currently, it doesn't feel like we can control a ton of it, but those are the little things that we can control, what we can control, and actually really promote some student athlete wellness behind it.
Great. Absolutely. And so, Murphy, kind of same question to you. Any sort of details behind some of the systems or processes you guys might use, right now with evaluating the athlete and communicating that? Particularly, we look at holiday breaks and how that has a role, not just in the past, but also coming up here as we enter a holiday break.
Yeah, right. Stacey, again, you're dropping some great knowledge to everyone on the processes and making things happen. But, even prior to even some of those things, when all of our athletes returned to campus, whether they were a brand new student athlete or a returner, we treated them all like new student athletes. Granted, we shared different things with them, but when they came back, it was an entirely new health history form. We were going through full physicals with them prior to this activity. Again, when you see them every day and you have the ability to coach and teach technique and you don't see them for 4 months, you truly don't know what's walking in the door. They may answer these questions one way, but once you have to get back and down to the details, you may see something else. So I praise our athletic training staff for, really asking the difficult questions on what they truly have been doing up to that point. And then our sports performance staff as well with the scans and monitoring and their evaluation with it. So when it came to the acclimatization standpoint, we knew that there were some kids, and we all have them, that worked hard every single day. And then there were some that, if it worked for them, they did it. So we had to make sure that we didn't all group them together. Again, I mentioned earlier, we were working towards competition, so we had to make sure that everyone was moving in the same direction. We may not have been moving at the same speed, but we were all moving at the same direction to reach the goal. And then again, you mentioned these breaks. I think most of our student athletes are leaving campus right around Thanksgiving and not returning till January. And then who knows what competition is going to begin in January. So it's almost this a similar approach. We have the ability to share workouts, monitor their workouts, but again, we don't know what's going to walk in the door come January. So all these things that we're doing daily, weekly with them, we're going to have to use that information, use that data, and then apply it once they return, because we're going to have to do all the rescans again. Again, knowing that window for competition may be even shorter than when they came back in June and July. So again, she mentioned Sparta, and we'll utilize that as well just to see where they are upon their return.
Yeah, it's in a way, right? It's a mass individualization, right? as conflicting as that might sound, that's really what you're talking about, right? Is you've got a group and everybody's working the same goal, but individually everybody's progressing or at a different place, even more so during these times.
Yeah, ideal. And you see it. I mean, it's amazing what we've seen when they've come back. I don't know. It's been interesting.
The range, yeah,
Right.
yeah, for sure. And Tori, from an NATA just leadership perspective, what changes to the evaluation process, are you seeing, just from a trend level?
It really was unprecedented. Clearly the biggest pause button we've ever pushed, in athletics history. Even some of the professional league strikes didn't rival the amount of time that, we were coming back from a huge layoff. And so it did require everything that Murphy and Stacey talked about and even a lot more. And so some of the things that we worked on behalf of athletic trainers, as well as the practitioners in that high performance team, were some of the interprofessional collaborative relationships with the sports medicine physicians, the sports orthos, so AMSSM, AOSSM, and trying to hone in on those best practices in a time when best practices really didn't exist. We've talked about that, but also in a time where some of the information that we were receiving on a daily and weekly basis related to the pandemic required us to, do some of the new policies, guidelines, expectations in pencil versus pen, and make sure that membership understood the necessary ability to stay tuned and to, really stay connected to NATA and the work that ICSM was doing. So I'll go back to those interprofessional relationships because, that's so critical to the interprofessional team that makes a high performance team function. And so having the physicians is a key part of it. And then making sure that when you're considering other providers like sports dietitians and the mental health providers, the licensed psychologists and psychiatrists, as well as the ATs and the sports performance coaches that we've already spoken of, that everybody is on board with how the pre-participation system that both Stacey and Murphy described is going to change, making sure that everybody is on board with not just what we're going to do differently, but why we're going to do it differently. And then back to the weekly monitoring piece, if everybody's not on board with both components, the what and the why, you're going to be in trouble when it comes to, what's best in terms of your overall approach to student athlete health and wellness and performance enhancement. So I think those are the areas that we not only learned from, but were able to capitalize on the relationships that we had throughout that high performance team and the organizations that support and resource those individual members.
Yeah, that just demand for alignment, has probably never been greater. Yeah. Yeah, to your point, especially in the biggest pause button in history, is at least as it relates to sports.
Yeah, and Murphy touched on maybe a micro of the macro, and that is we're going to utilize what we've done and what we've learned between March and June, July in the future. We're going to utilize it for the mini resets around Thanksgiving break. We're going to utilize it on the 1 month resets, perhaps around the other holidays. We're certainly going to be better next pre-fall coming off of, the whatever summer break we have, heaven forbid, but if we have another shutdown, like, we're seeing as described in our pre-show meeting here in Europe in a number of different football clubs, we don't know what's coming. We don't know what December, January, February is going to bring. And I think individually feel much more prepared, of course, than we were. So it's going to last for us.
Absolutely. So I think diving a little bit even deeper into the weeds here on assessments, a lot of times in rehab in particular, at least personally, I got into this because as a student athlete, I was injured, and traditionally there's not a lot of objectivity in the rehab process. There's great practitioners, but a lot of times it's tends to be based on time metrics, right? And so during a time like this, objectivity becomes super important. So I think, Stacey, when you think about, or let's start with Murphy here, when thinking about the role and the value that objective data is playing in the rehab process, when you're looking at technologies or data, what do you look for when you're adding something new? And how do these things make you more efficient, or make your staffs more efficient in the process?
Right, right. Great question. With the role I'm in now, and even previously, I guess the first thing I look at is, will we even use the technology? That is the first thing that I think about. Will it get used? There's really, really good technology all around the world, but will we use it? How will it benefit our student athletes medically? How will it benefit them from a performance standpoint? And then how easily is it implemented? I think that it has to be user friendly for the individuals who are incorporating it into their practice, or into what they want to do to progress their student athlete. There has to be some practicality on the usage standpoint. But then once it's there, and we know that we're going to collect some really good data, how is it going to be translated back to the student athlete to make them better? So all those things definitely need to be thought about. I definitely think about them and have those conversations with my staff before we, move forward with any type of technology. I just don't want to get it to get it. How is it going to benefit them? How is it going to make their jobs easier? But at the same time, the reason why we're purchasing it is to help our student athletes progress and make them better as well. So it's a group conversation on how practical it's going to be, and we definitely think about that every single time. I think with just technology in general, there's an efficiency behind it, but again, it's how you use it and if you're using it. So those are some things that I think about when I'm looking at it.
Yeah, great point. Technology by nature, hopefully efficiency is an innate part of that, right? That it's
right.
Any technology should make you more efficient, but to your point, it's not always going to be used, right? So that, while it may seem obvious, that should be the first question. Are we actually going to use it, right? Because every culture, every organization is different, and it can be easy to jump into the checkbox scenario where, oh, we've got to get this because we don't have that, as opposed to reverse engineering it. Use the word translation to athletes, which is great. Is this going to translate to action? And then are we actually going to use it consistently enough to find value in it?
Yeah, for sure. And, and again, it helps the athletic trainers, it gives them a greater knowledge base on something new, and I know we'll be speaking about it a little bit later, but, it's another role for the athletic trainer when it comes to sports science.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so Stacey, same question to you. When adding technology, what are you looking for, kind of your decision tree of, like, you mentioned before, like, you may not have the resources to be looking and then getting everything. So it's like, how do you think or prioritize those options in your mind?
I think Murphy and I read the same playbook today. A lot of shared thoughts here. I agree 100%, especially, again, during these times, we have to be very, very mindful of what we're asking from a monetary standpoint. It's an economic crisis in a lot of college institutions that we haven't had to face before. One of my biggest take homes from data is it helps a lot of people from different backgrounds speak the same language. So it was wonderful to see when we started to integrate some data into what we did here, that sports performance, we're speaking the same exact language as sports medicine. And we've always been having a shared goal, but now we had a way to express it, to look at it from an objective perspective, and really just unify. That was probably the biggest thing for me, is seeing how that happened. And then all of a sudden, that shared language infiltrated with the coaches. So I was able, as the men's lacrosse athletic trainer, to have the same exact conversation to a women's volleyball coach. And maybe I wouldn't have, but she right away understood that I get it, I see it, I know what you're working towards, and this is what we're doing to evaluate it. This is what we're doing to improve some of the shortcomings. And here is some data to prove that I think we're getting closer to that. So just having that ability to have a shared language with one another, so the entire department is moving towards that common goal of prioritizing student athlete wellness, and sports performance, and being competitive on the field through healthy athletes. It just unifies all of us.
Yeah, it's having that common language.
And
Absolutely.
that common language that isn't just opinions. Again, I'm relatively new here at UMBC, and I have some coaches that have been here for 18 years. I have some coaches that have been here for 10 years. I was privileged to follow a director of sports medicine that was here for a very, very, very long time. She ended up retiring here. So I spoke a very different language than she did. And I needed to find a way to communicate, and it not just being like, well, she did that at her last institution, or she did that at an institution that's not even anywhere near the America East. It allowed me to take some of those opinions and just say, no, this is what we've done. I've proved that it works. Just trust me. And then the buy-in comes. And then we were lucky enough to have some conference wins. And it was like, oh, wow, that does work. That does work. And just, again, at the end of the day, it benefits our student athletes greatly because they're healthier, they're well, and we start winning.
Yeah, that's always the best validator, right?
The happy, healthy athletes is number one, but the coaches really like those wins to follow close behind that.
Totally. Yeah. And so, Tori, question to you, what from an NATA level, at least either now or potentially in the future, is there for lack of a better word, a playbook for trainers to think about how to evaluate bringing in certain technologies, or, as in terms of a what and a why, if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about where the NATA stance is on that.
Well, there's a lot of understanding and appreciation for, the athletic trainer's role that we're talking about today, and we'll continue to talk about. And we as a profession, have always been excellent collaborators. And the only way you succeed in this space is to take an interprofessional approach to practice. And we've talked about that. So that continues to be, where discussions start, specific to athletic training and athletic trainers being better at the things that we're talking about now, as well as we have talked about. And I'll say specific to the area of rehabilitation, objective data, my answer to all that is more. The more that we can bring, as long as you can do the things that Stacey and Murphy talked about, which I think one of the things that we're not very good at is we get pretty high repetition on some post-operative rehabs, and we get pretty good repetition on very similar time loss injuries, to the point where I don't think as a profession we're doing as good enough of a job in this particular setting of communicating that to our patient population. If there is a phase by phase approach to a rehabilitation program or a lengthy time loss injury, and we have data, how often do we stop, take 20, 25 minutes, just sit in an office or sit in a physician exam room or a private area and say, here's where we've been in your rehabilitation, here's where we're headed in your rehabilitation. Let's talk about common goals. The patient-centered approach is often lost in the hustle and the bustle, as well as, again, the repetition of, this is my X amount of my 25th career ACL rehabilitation. I've been through this before. Well, it's hopefully that student athlete's first ACL rehabilitation program, and too many things that we know in here stay in here, and we're not communicating them well enough to an athlete. So, back to the question that you asked, I think as a profession, we're focused on doing a better job overall of educating athletic trainers on what those opportunities are in sports science, what the role of the athletic trainer, in an interprofessional approach to sports science should be, talking about operational definitions thereof, talking about the structures that are best practices and ideal, maybe keeping some of the other things in mind related to risk, liability, licensure, and some of the ways in which the practice acts are impacted that we can touch on as well. So that's kind of the general overall approach is to provide more education to the athletic trainer and what their role can be. And I'll hit on some specifics probably later on.
Yeah, it was very military term used, operational definitions. Yeah. But makes sense, right? Because a lot of times when we look at technology or practice, there's assumptions that are made, to your point, things that are in here that maybe aren't communicated, to a colleague or to the athlete, the patient themselves, right? What are those definitions? What is load, and what are some of these phases of the rehab process in particular that could be better defined to enhance communication? Operational definition. Yeah, like it. So continue to kind of peel back these layers. We talked about, decisions on buying technologies and just being more specific. Stacey, why, at UMBC, what ultimately allowed you to choose Sparta to implement there, and what were some of the leading or lagging indicators for you that kind of confirmed your decision?
Thanks, Phil. I think for me, it was the biggest thing is we were able to use this technology to benefit all student athletes. And having the data behind Sparta is something that I don't have access to unless I do lots and lots and lots of digging and research. But I couldn't find a piece of technology that had the data-driven injury indicators that Sparta had. So for me, my number one desire here, my very first year, was to have some culture shift in sports medicine and sports performance. That was priority number one. Rebuild the departments a little bit. And priority 1.1 was decreased injury rates. It was a little bit of an issue here. And I would say some of it is because of lack of technology. There wasn't a lot of ways that we could objectify how these student athletes were subjectively reporting they were feeling. So knowing that I needed to get something in that, again, wouldn't be just this new person taking over because I'm rebuilding culture. It's this person who is creating this department where both interchange very comfortably together between sports medicine and sports performance. And then being able to prove that what we're doing and what we're implementing as a team actually benefited our student athletes. And it did, and it has. And unfortunately, we're a little derailed with our data collection due to the COVID pandemic. But our injury rates, our first year and a half, our average days lost went from about 16 down to 3, which was a remarkable way for me to kind of say to our AD, hey, we can keep doing more of this. We're just scratching the surface. So for UMBC, Sparta really fit my exact needs of injury mitigation and really just trying to build the healthiest, most sturdy, most durable, and most competitive student athlete. And it worked. The buy-in happened. It was a really fun transformation to kind of see our coaches buy in, our student athletes buy in very hard because they were feeling better. They were moving better. We were playing well. So it's been a really fun 3 years, and I'm really excited to keep progressing down that road. But for me, it was the data that comes with Sparta and the partnership that we get from it. We are a small operation of currently 6 athletic trainers and 2 sports performance staff members. And just knowing that if I want to dig deeper into some data, I can pick up the phone and I can call Chase. We can have a meeting. We can look at the dashboard. For me, it's almost like I have another staff member who can kind of help me dig through the data on days that I'm too busy doing something else. Just really having this strong partnership has worked out really well for us as well.
Yeah, that's great, because I think each one of you, either at an organization or in a professional accreditation like the NATA, are so focused on building your own cultures that everybody's adding and collaborating into, right? And so, if technology can help support and validate that, and it's great to hear that Sparta's played a role as being this silent partner, if you will, to support that. It's fantastic. Murphy, we first met when you were at Kansas, where Sparta was used, and then at Wake Forest now. How has our predictive diagnosis and recovery kind of improved the efficiency for you and the colleagues in your team?
Right. It's been really, really nice, after seeing the implementation and the usage of Sparta Science with my good friend and colleague, Andrea Hootie. We had many conversations about the usage of Sparta, but having the understanding from our athletic trainers and our performance on, load, explode, and drive, when it comes to some of the predictive diagnosis, being able to indicate the athlete's ability to eccentrically load, looking at mobility, being able to figure out how they are transferring forces, to all the forces. Seeing those things from the clinician's standpoint, being able to show the student athlete those scores as well, on the things that they need from a predictive standpoint, has been quite key and efficient, because we're all seeing the same thing. And I think that's what Stacey was talking about as well. We're all speaking the same language here. And it gives the student athlete the opportunity to see it and almost speak the same language with us as well. But then from a recovery standpoint, again, seeing these scores, being able to monitor daily has helped us all, and it takes more than just the athletic trainers to help with the recovery piece, as this team working together, speaking the same language, we can all work towards the same common goal, so Sparta's been really, really nice along with that, and then it's easy to read and it's easy to understand. So that makes things so much easier for us all.
And I love how when I keep asking you guys about technology, you keep bringing it back to people.
Right.
Yeah, which is great, right? That's ultimately why all of us got into this
right.
Profession, right? Whether that's through, student athletes or coaches, right? Or, earlier Tori had mentioned, team doctors and orthopedists, like ultimately that common language, makes us all better and really helps, I think, engage different stakeholders. The athlete's got to be able to understand it, right? And coaches have to have some sort of awareness to understand what you're relaying, which is great.
Absolutely. We're all on the same team,
Yeah.
And I think that is another thing that needs to just be shared. We're all on the same team. We all want the same things. We all have different roles to reach that goal, whether we are the athletic trainer or the equipment manager, whomever it may be, we're all on the same team to win and to be successful and take care of whomever it is.
I don't know if Duke would say that they're on your same team, but yeah, I get your sentiment. Yeah. No, it's great. So Tori, we've got about 10 minutes left here. So kind of as we start to kind of close out, what role does technology play in the day-to-day of the athletic training profession, certainly now, but also how do we move this forward? I know when we first met, we talked about how important that role was because of, how important injuries are to, the health state, and athletic trainers are certainly on the front lines of that.
One word, more and more every single day. The technology will impact us. We're talking about some specifics here and have given some highlight to some of the ways in which technology is better informing us to take better care of our patients, but to also, help them perform at a higher level. But we're also utilizing technology to communicate better. And when Stacey talks about dashboards, there are a number of ways in which with the collection of professionals that the high performance team is made up of, we're nothing without the ability to communicate. And you really can't do that given the demands of each of those different practitioners in any given day without some support of technology. So I think it's just as much about the technology that's going to impact the treatment and the performance enhancement as it is the technology that's going to impact our ways to communicate better and be better in an interprofessional environment. We think about how the athletic trainers, but others have a role in sports science. And our challenge as a profession, as an organization, from an NATA perspective is creating some definitions around that in a space where there is none. And, you kind of start with that overarching head scratcher. Is sports science a profession or is it a practice? And our approach really has to be that it's a practice. And as an organization, it's our responsibility to do a better job of teaching the practice of sports science and teaching the importance and the role of technology in patient care and performance enhancement. So, there's some things we will do. We will help define it for the profession of athletic training. We will emphasize the importance of a healthcare provider at the top of that food chain. Again, because of the things we've talked about related to implications on practice acts and implications on risk and liability when non-healthcare providers are involved in return to play and healthcare decisions. That's a really sensitive area. And then we will do a much better job of creating an annual area, an expo for the technologies, a place for sports science professionals and practitioners to come together and have an annual meeting, so to speak, but meetings take on a totally different definition, are having, will continue to. So we want to be able to provide that space. And then, as I mentioned before, we're absolutely going to be in the business of post-professional education in performance health, in performance science, in sports science, so that athletic trainers understand, not just the importance of their role, but know how to work with others in those interprofessional roles and see it mentored on a day-to-day basis from people like Stacey and Murphy and many, many others, but also know those post-professional education opportunities to become more proficient. So those are some of the key areas that NATA has really been and will be focused on. We've got some really good people with some really great ideas coming in the near future.
Yeah, I think there's an incredible leadership opportunity there that certainly, we're hearing from Stacey and Murphy too on, how to lead departments and not necessarily defer on these decisions with technology and sports science, because at the end of the day, it is more of a practice, right? That everybody should be engaged in and not siloed off into one title or one role.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
Agreed.
great.
Totally.
I think, a couple last questions here for Murphy and Stacey. You guys both hit on buy-in from coaches and student athletes. How does the objectivity of the Sparta scan help generate or translate that student athlete taking more ownership? Because I think it's important with these mini resets that keep happening, right, with holidays and potential shutdowns. How does that help the student athlete take more ownership of their care? Start with Murphy here, on that question.
Yeah, again, I think that's a great question because one, we have to have buy-in from everyone at the end of the day. We can talk about the technology. We can share the technology. Once we begin to have results, I think that's where the buy-in comes from. Having the opportunity to have the results and the scores, numbers don't lie, so, 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. And when you can show the concrete evidence there, everyone starts to buy in. But even having the student athlete, think about the self-care and taking care of themselves, when you can, again, show them that, if you did, the A, B, and C's, if we can do this particular thing, it may be something super small, and they begin to see the benefit of it. And they are the ones that are controlling that, control the controllables. You get even more of a buy-in. And once you get student athletes that are part of their own care, I know that Tori mentioned this as well. We keep all these rehab exercises in our head, but if it's patient-centered care, then we're actually having those conversations with the student athletes and that patient about their health, their performance, and having them to be a part of that. And part of that is sharing how they feel, what's truly wrong with them and not keeping it in. So again, what Sparta provides helps with that. I know the student athletes have the ability to get the dashboard, and some results on their phone that they can monitor and take care of as well. So it's been a huge benefit for us. And I think that once they have the ability to see it, again, the self-care will probably happen more and more.
Yes, it's those results that are driving it. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And so Stacey, yeah, same question to you. Like, how does that objective, Sparta scan, how has it helped you generate buy-in, from the athletes?
So I think we've talked a lot about how our world has shifted. We as medical practitioners, as well as sports performance coaches, have always understood that what we do with our student athletes for 4 hours a day does not trump what they do for the other 20 hours out of the day. And I know that more and more has impacted. I don't have the access to my student athletes due to COVID restrictions that I used to. We're here, we've had college athletics back, we're doing a great job, but it looks really different. I don't have that open door policy where a student athlete can pop in and say, my hip's a little tight, can you help me? So we've really had to empower them with that self-care. So for us, being able to tie the technology into it so they better understand that 1 + 1 does equal 2. So what is that one? What is that other one? And how did we get to 2? Whether it's heart rate variance in the morning, they're understanding that, oh my goodness, it's first thing in the morning and this is where I'm at. Understanding that the activities that they did the day before or how their mental state is impacting their heart rate variance first thing in the morning. That speaks volumes. Whether it's that simple dashboard change on the Sparta dashboard, that, hey, all of a sudden we're down 3 points. How are you doing? It allows that conversation to be open. It allows that conversation to be had. And then hopefully at the end of the day, tie it back to what that root of the problem is and that indicator. So for us, again, it just like Murphy said, it takes that, this is how I'm doing, and puts numbers and data to it so I can help empower them to do what they need to do on the front end if I don't have that direct access to them right away, which we know Thanksgiving's coming, as we've all touched on. We're going to have another recess again. So just giving them all the tools in their toolbox to go home with as we keep monitoring them throughout the break.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Yeah, the change in the open door policy has been pretty drastic. Yeah. Well, thank you for everybody. I know we're at the top of the hour here, and so just want to give a huge thank you to the three of you as panelists, leaders at several different areas in the field. So huge thank you, and we'll have a recording of this available on the website spartascience.com and also available on social channels. And so any feedback or questions that listeners might have for Tori, Stacey, or Murphy, please let us know. success@spartascience.com. You can just email us and we can forward it on to them, or if it's just feedback for Sparta, we can take that into account for the future. So just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us, and look forward to chatting more.
Awesome opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
All right. Take care. Stay safe.